traditional farmers are targeted for extinction. They will be extinct by the end of this decade if it continues on this trajectory. And we have to stop that because there's not many things humans need to do, but one of them is to eat healthy food if you want to stay alive. We're not going to survive on synthetic garbage that they're creating for us. It's not going to work. It's not going to end well at all. So when you're this is the point I'm going back to, is that when you're outside farming, you get sun exposure. Imagine that. You're not inside looking at social media on your computer, watching TV or whatever. You're not indoors. You need to be outside for a significant part of the day. So most of us aren't there. We're not farmers. We have jobs. We have responsibilities. So what can you do? Practical thing you can do is understand that there is a time value of the exposure. So it's great to be outside any time of the day, even at night, but the value from the biological radiation from the sun peaks at solar noon. Now, right now, we're not in daylight savings time. So solar noon is solar noon, 12 o'clock. And when daylight saving times kicks in, typically after April 1st, then we go forward. So solar noon is 1 o'clock. So to be outside with minimal clothing around solar noon for about an hour is a good goal.
Hey everyone, Dr. Josh Axe here, and welcome to the Ancient Health Podcast. Today we are going to be talking to an old friend of mine, somebody I've known for so many years. In fact, I attended one of his wellness seminars. This would have been back in 2004, so 20 years ago. It's Dr. Joseph Mercola, and super excited to have him today. We're going to be talking about the link between emotional well-being and our physical health. We'll dive into Dr. Mercola's latest books and his fresh insights on health topics. And there's always something new that I learn every time I talk to Dr. Mercola. And we're also going to be catching up on his recent endeavors and how he believes we can better integrate mental and physical health into our daily routines for improved health and well-being. And so excited to dive in here together. Dr. Mercola, thanks so much for coming on and welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, hey, I want to dive right in because there are so many questions I have for you. We maybe go 10, 12 rounds here.
Yeah,
One of the first, though, is let's talk about the mental health today of the country. One of the things that I know you and I have noticed, I remember 20 years ago when I attended your first seminar, you talked a lot about insulin and insulin resistance and the issues today regarding diabetes being on the climb, maybe faster than any disease when you looked at childhood diabetes and obesity. Well, today, when you look at the statistics, mental health issues over the past 5 years have skyrocketed. What do you believe some of the root causes are of mental health issues increasing so significantly?
Well, I think there's many variables that contribute to it, but one of the ones that I'm passionate about is exploring the biological variables that contribute to them. That's what I really spent the last 50 years exploring. So there's a real strong connection between your body's ability to create cellular energy, usually from the mitochondria, not always, but typically. And once that cellular energy production decreases, you have less overall energy. Now, your brain is obviously where the mental health issues, right? It's in your brain. So it's 2% of your body, but yet consumes 20% of the energy your body produces. 20%. That's an extraordinary fact. So it strongly suggests that energy is important for the brain and for mental health. So in 2004, I haven't done really my own presentations or at least I've sponsored my own for about 20 years, 2 decades. It's a long time. I speak pretty much every year at someone's, but not mine. That might change in the future. It likely will, but right for now I haven't been. But when I was doing it back then, my understanding was insulin. And what I've come to appreciate since that time is that insulin is for the most part an innocent bystander. It's not the cause in any way, shape, or form. Yes, it is probably the single best biometric indicator of metabolic flexibility. And 95%, Josh, 95% of the people in the United States are metabolically inflexible. Actually, the number was 93.4%, and that was done in a 2019 NHANES data. So it's 5 years old. So it's probably over maybe 96% of the US because it's gone up linearly, straight up. So what's the cause? The cause is not too much carbs, not too much sugar, but it is probably related to too much processed foods, because what's in processed foods universally and is not appreciated, very few people understand this, is a product of industrialization that occurred it started in the late, or the American Civil War, 1870s, where they attained the ability to extract oil from seeds, seed oils, or vegetable oils, what they're euphemistically called today, inaccurately, euphemistically. They're seed oils. And never before in human history it was impossible to eat a seed oil prior to 1870. Now we eat them. And in fact, it's the primary fat that most people consume. And there's a consequence for that, because these are really fragile, perishable fats that are highly susceptible to oxidative stress. And the fats themselves aren't particularly dangerous, but because they're so susceptible to being damaged, they form these really toxic metabolic byproducts. They're called oxalams, which is oxidative linoleic acid metabolites, and they're called other things too, but that's probably the most accurate. And there are many dangerous ones to some of people, for like 4-hydroxynonenal, 4-HNE, malondialdehyde. There are literally hundreds of these reactive aldehydes that cause all the damage. And if you don't have high linoleic acid, you can't make them. So the solution isn't to, it's nice to have antioxidants to protect you and stuff, but it would be better, that I believe, and I'm sure you do too, that prevention is the key. So that, in my mind, is the most important change that's occurred that contributes to this. And yes, there's stressors. Yes, they brainwashed and propagandized us during the COVID, and people are dying needlessly and dropping like flies as a result of their suggestions and interventions and mandates and coercion. But fundamentally, those who are healthier biologically and are able to create cellular energy, have good thyroid function, and really their brain works. They can have critical thinking skills, and they can function the way they're designed to. So I think that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, I think these are excellent points. And I think that one of the other thing, as you mentioned, I think culture in general, social media, right? People being addicted to their smartphones, that there's issues there as well, right? Affecting the younger people, mental health and well-being. I know one of the things that people are trading is spending time on their devices, whether it be a cell phone or a computer or a tablet, instead of spending time outside. You were one of the first people I heard talking about the benefits of sunlight and vitamin D. Could you discuss a little bit more specifically sunlight? Because it's more than just vitamin D, right? And to get into vitamin D, but how does it impact us?
That was a very prescient question. Thank you for asking it, because, I'm writing a new book, and it'll be out in the fall. It's actually written, but we're staging a whole variety of functions or activities around it. So I know what the book is, and I've condensed 50 years of studying and really seeking to understand biology and what optimizes it, and summarize it to 5 points. And the very first one is what you said. I think the most foundational thing that you can do to stay healthy is to be in the sun. That's number one. And certainly for some of the reason is to optimize vitamin D. Now, please understand that means a variety of things. First of all, you have to live in a location where that's possible. Most of us don't. I happen to live in Florida, so it is possible most of the year, although there's 2 to 3 months. Fortunately, we just escaped them as we're recording this. It's mid-March, and I'm getting plenty. We only literally have about maybe 2 months of the year where there's not sufficient sunshine. Because of the latitude, the rays, you're not going to get sufficient ultraviolet B, and the more important, which is near infrared. So the first thing is you have to live in the right latitude to get the sun exposure. But even if you do, say you're living on the equator, if you're living indoors all the time and not going outside, exposing your sun or skin to the sun, you're not going to benefit from that latitude. You have to be in the sun. At the turn of the 20th century, do you know what the most common occupation was in America?
Probably farming.
Farming is correct. That is correct. You got it. It's my hope. Why am I going there? Well, for 2 reasons. One is that AI is upon us. Everyone knows that, and most likely will result in the loss of maybe a quarter of the jobs that exist right now. I think that's highly likely. So you're going to wonder, what are these people going to do? What could they possibly do? Well, we have industrial agriculture, which is an abomination, absolute abomination, and certainly largely responsible for much of the disease, primarily because almost all of industrial agriculture uses these processed seed oils. That's what they do. That's what they make them. That's corn, soy, canola. These are all bad. These are not good news items for us. And yet that's a huge portion of what industrial agriculture is producing ostensibly as food. So what they can, what 2 points? One, I'm getting back to the original. It is a tangent. I know where I'm going. just to assure you, the what the people who are displaced by AI can do is return to farming and really serve as a substitute. Because one of my goals is to destroy industrial agriculture, and I think, and I'm grateful for AI to facilitate that transition back to the earth. And when they're farming conventionally, because traditional farmers are targeted for extinction. They will be extinct by the end of this decade if it continues on this trajectory. And we have to stop that because there's not many things humans need to do, but one of them is to eat healthy food if you want to stay alive. We're not going to survive on synthetic garbage that they're creating for us. It's not going to work. It's not going to end well at all. So when you're this is the point I'm going back to, is that when you're outside farming, you get sun exposure. Imagine that you're not inside looking at social media on your computer, watching TV or whatever. You're not indoors. You need to be outside for a significant amount of the day. So most of us aren't there. We're not farmers. We have jobs. We have responsibilities. So what can you do? The practical thing you can do is understand that there is a time value of the exposure. So it's great to be outside any time of the day, even at night, but the value from the biological radiation from the sun peaks at solar noon. Now, right now, we're not in daylight savings time. So solar noon is solar noon, 12 o'clock. And when daylight saving times kicks in, typically after April 1st, then we go forward. So solar noon is 1 o'clock. So to be outside with minimal clothing around solar noon for about an hour is a good goal. And maybe if you're in really low latitude, single digit latitudes, maybe it's 15, 20 minutes because, especially in the summer months. So you'll need less. But the key is to get outside. And you properly suggested that there was more than vitamin D. It is. The primary issue, the other variable that virtually very few people appreciate, is near infrared radiation, near IR, which composes about 15 to 20% of the solar radiation, or solar. I think it's solar radiation. Yeah. So the UVB, which creates vitamin D, is about 5%. So it's like 4 or 5 times higher than the wavelengths are responsible for creating vitamin D. So you would think, yeah, but it's that much higher. Maybe there's some importance to it, and there probably is, and that'd be correct. And so the question becomes, what does it do? Have you thought about what it does, or do you have any idea?
Oh yeah, you're asking vitamin D or just sunshine in general?
No, the near infrared radiation.
Yeah, well, I know one of the things it does is it's incredible for the health of our mitochondria. I mean, our cellular energy. That is the answer. That is the correct answer. Gold star for Josh. That's correct. And it is absolutely essential for mitochondrial cellular energy production. But the more accurate question is, how does it do it? How does it cause it? What's the mechanism? How does it produce energy? How does it facilitate energy production in the mitochondria? Yeah, well, I know probably a little bit more about how it does it in the liver, but I'll let you explain it from the cellular standpoint.
Okay. Well, it's actually subcellular mitochondria. There's mechanisms, and none of these mechanisms are proven. My intention is to prove the latter, which is probably responsible for 75% of the production. And that is when the lights come down, they hit your tissues, and near infrared is not obstructed by water. It's not absorbed by water. For far and mid is. And as a result of that, because your body's consisted of a lot of water, it's bulk water typically. I forget the percentages. I should know that, but I don't recall what the percentage. But it's a significant percentage of your body, water molecules. And when there's water molecules in your tissue, the near and far rays do not penetrate. They only go down like a 1/16 of an inch, maybe a 32nd, very superficial, top part of your skin. They do not penetrate your organs. The only thing that penetrates your organs is near infrared. So you think there's some secret sauce in there? There is. Because they're not hitting the water molecules. So what do they hit? Well, one theory, and it probably is responsible for 25% of the improvement, is it hits the complexes in the mitochondria. There's 5 of them. And the 4th one is the most important case, an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase. And that enzyme contains metals, sometimes viewed as minerals, such as iron and copper. But they're metals. They're actually chemical metals, and they function as chromophores. which means it's a fancy Latin word for it attracts light. It's, it's like a magnet for light. So it goes there. And what does it do once it hits complex 4? Typically as a result of metabolic inflexibility and biological impairment, there's an increase in nitric oxide, and most of us think nitric oxide is useful, but when it's high, it is not. It's actually pernicious and can cause lots of damage. So what the belief is, and it's probably likely true because there's a lot of anecdotal support around it, is that the near-infrared light actually displaces. It's not a covalent bond. It's actually ionic, but it displaces. It's the energy provided displaces nitric oxide, and then complex 4 can generate energy more efficiently. And then essentially, because the next place is complex 5, and that's ATP synthase, and you're generating ATP. So that's 25%. The other 75% is likely related to the fact that it creates structured water. And in structured, do you know what structured water is? You've heard of it,
of course.
Right?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people drink it, but that's not the ideal way to do it. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's not going to hurt you, but it's not going to give the benefit that you need. And what is structured water? It's also called hexagonal water or gel water. It actually has a different molecular structure. It's not H2O. It's H3O2. And if you look at it molecularly, it's like a beehive. It's got these hexagons, what it does is it stores the energy. It actually creates a differential electrical potential, so that you have a negative and a positive, and that's like a battery. It serves as a functional battery. So what happens is there's items in your cells, and I'm not going to disclose it because I've actually in the process of writing a paper, and I'm pretty confident it's going to be candidate for a Nobel Prize, because this is a mechanism that has to do with how that occurs. I've discovered it. No one else has. I figured it out. But it's responsible for about 75% of the benefit of infrared light into the body. But essentially what it does functionally, without disclosing the mechanism, it's a transducer. It converts the sunlight to stored energy in a battery, which then is transferred to the mitochondria, and that energy also increases the hydrogen ion concentration in the intermitochondrial space, which is what's needed to drive ATP synthase. So it facilitates production of cellular mitochondrial energy, very similar to the way glucose is a storage. When you eat enough glucose, your body doesn't use it. What does it do with it? I mean, if it's a lot, it can store it as fat, but that's kind of wasteful. What it wants to do first is use it for immediate use, and that would be going to your liver and storing it as glycogen, so that when you're not eating, you're sleeping, that your liver has a supply of glucose, because that brain, again, that energy, right? If you don't have glucose, you're dead. You are literally dead in seconds. I don't care how much you're fasting or how much ketones you're making or ingesting as a supplement exogenously, you'll be dead. Yes, ketones supply energy to the brain. They're a cofactor, but they are not the sole source. If you don't have sugar molecules in your brain, you are dead. There's no way around. And to prove it, give anyone a dose of insulin and they'll die, because it drops the sugar levels too high or too low, and you're dead. You go into hypoglycemic coma and your brain stops working. That's not a good thing. That's why we have these, they're called stress hormone responses, like glucagon, adrenaline, and cortisol, that catalyze the formation of glucose. So if someone's foolishly fast for a week, which I don't think is a good idea for most people. I used to think it was good, but now I know it's not, because I've learned from Dr. Ray Peat's work, who passed last year or the year before last, that's not a good idea, because stress hormones are real and they keep you alive. But when you're chronically activating your stress hormones and producing the emotional stressors, which was your first question, then it could be problematic. So actually fasting could contribute to those emotional stressors. It's not necessarily the best thing for you. And I would be very cautious about recommending fasting. I don't know if you're still involved in keto or low carb or intermittent fasting.
No. You know what? I've never recommended keto for long-term use.
Yes,
I've never.
That's good. That's smart.
Yeah. Because of that very same thing.
Yeah. It's the stress hormones that do it. Because it all boils down to the brain needing sugar. There's no way around it. And if you're not ingesting it as you should, because most people need, I would say, a minimum of 150 grams of sugar a day, glucose, sugar. And the best form is, what would you say the best form of sugar is, if you're to get that? Well,
I'm a huge blueberry fan. But
Okay. That's the right answer. Maybe not necessarily blueberries, but blueberries is sort of because there's a lot of good polyphenols. And if you have a healthy gut, those polyphenols are actually very beneficial to improve gut health. But if you don't have a healthy gut, as most people don't, they don't have then
true.
blueberries can be problematic, highly problematic, because there's fibers in there and the fibers are digested. When you have an unhealthy gut, you have a predominance of pathogenic bacteria, gram-negative facultative anaerobes that embedded in their cell walls is endotoxin or lipopolysaccharide LPS. And when they are fed and fertilized and grow and die, that endotoxin is a potent metabolic poison. It just suppresses mitochondrial function and in large doses can kill you from septic shock. And that does happen to many people every year because they die of endotoxin toxicity because of gut microbiome imbalance. So that's a paradox because some fruits can be dangerous if you have an unhealthy gut. So it all depends. But your fruit, I believe, is the healthiest carbohydrate you could possibly eat. And I eat like 4 pounds of watermelon in the morning, and I have oranges and apples throughout the day. So I'm a big fan of fruit. And I think most people need 150 grams. Going to 50-gram low carb is, prescription for disaster in my viewpoint. And many people believe that and follow that. But I would encourage them to reconsider and follow some of Ray Peat's work about the stress hormones. But, I think most people benefit from higher. I'm personally floating around 400, 450 grams of carbohydrates a day. So I feel really good with it. And, guess what? I measure my insulin like every 2 weeks or so. Guess what it was last time? You won't believe it. It was unmeasurable. It was less than 0.4.
Wow.
Now, that's pretty exceptional with 450 grams of carbs a day. So clearly it's not causing insulin resistance in me because that is the best metric for metabolic flexibility is a fasting insulin. It should be below 3. It shouldn't have people below 0.4 or unmeasurable. And I think Quest doesn't even, they only go to below 2, but LabCorp does have a lower threshold sensitivity. And they go to, I didn't know, I actually beat that for the first time. I never got down below 0.4, which is interesting. So
wow,
that's low. Have you measured your fasting insulin?
You know what? Not for years. I did years ago. It was low too.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was that low, but it was. It was pretty low. This is why now it's been years. I use one of those continuous blood glucose monitors.
CGMs.
And that was so interesting, because there were certain things that I thought. I want to give you an example of this. There were certain foods, there were certain fruits that really caused my numbers to jump a little bit more. But then, for instance, just give you an example, potatoes. My body acted like I could eat potatoes all day and it didn't seem to affect it.
Yeah. Potatoes actually is a decent, if you have a healthy gut, it's particularly good. Potatoes and rice. You want to cook them though really well. You don't want to eat them raw. They're very toxic. So you have to cook them really well. Ideally, the best way to cook potatoes is boil them in a pressure cooker and they'll cook them pretty well. Or rice too. Same thing. White rice, not brown rice.
Yeah. I'm curious, Dr. Mercola. When I first heard you lecture, you talked a lot about vitamin D, and you've promoted and talked about so many different nutrients over the years. Today, where you stand, what do you believe are the top nutritional deficiencies we currently have today?
Well, vitamin D is one, but it's not a vitamin deficiency. It's a sun deficiency. It's a marker. It's a biomarker for sun exposure, essentially. And unless you're taking a supplement, then it's not. But, the initial studies, the epidemiological studies that showed all the benefits of sun exposure and the massive impact it had on autoimmune diseases like MS would be a classic example, really well documented. And people weren't doing vitamin D testing or even taking supplements until I started that. I catalyzed that. I don't know if you remember that.
I believe it.
It was me.
I'm sure.
I was the one who was shouting from the rooftops that vitamin D is a big issue because I believed in sun exposure, and I've continued that belief. But I remember you getting so much flack. Listen, I remember you getting so much flack from people saying there's this crazy doctor saying we should get direct sunlight exposure and not the toxic sunscreen on our skin. And I remember you getting a hard time for it, but then the entire medical community adopted what you've been preaching for 10 years. So yes, absolutely. Well, actually closer to 2 decades because I started recommending it in the early 2000s, 2024. That's almost a quarter century.
Yeah.
So, I'm very grateful. It's one of my biggest to date clinical achievements is to help the community understand the importance of vitamin D. because they got a big platform and people read it and they pass it around, and it's hard to
Yeah.
stop information like that from going around. And it did. People start, and they regularly test it. But and actually, I'm in the process. I don't know if you read the mitochondrial research, but there's a assay called the seahorse assay. Have you ever heard of it?
I haven't read that one. No,
No,
I'd love
you
to
can
hear
look it
about it.
up. It's the gold standard for measuring mitochondrial function or
Mm.
respiration. It's a complex series of assays, very difficult to do. The equipment is not very expensive, but it's a very tedious assay, and you couldn't freeze a sample, so it was very difficult. It would cost thousands of dollars to do one test. It's not available in any lab. It's a research tool only. So I've actually am working with a company and acquired a patent from UCLA, or at least a license rather, to advance that technology so that we can commercially assay that and prove some of my theories. Because it's basically a research tool that you can document a person's mitochondrial function. You can implement an intervention and do pre and post and see the differences in how the mitochondria are working, and really define it objectively, not just, oh yeah, your mitochondria are better. Well, we can measure it. You can actually measure it. So that's pretty interesting. That's some of the research I'm doing later this year, writing papers on it. But getting back to the other nutrient deficiencies, because I do seek to honor and to answer your questions, commit to that. Certainly vitamin D is one, but again, not to take a supplement. I haven't taken vitamin D in coming up on 20 years. Yeah, maybe 15, 16, but it's coming up on 20. At some point, some will be 20 years. I just don't take vitamin D supplements. And throughout most of the summer last year, my vitamin D was in triple digits.
Wow.
Triple
Hey,
digits.
what do you believe the normal range should be for vitamin D? Because I know your recommendations are much higher than the,
well,
RDA.
60 to 80 is the goal for most people. But if you're getting it from the sun, there's no concern because you have intrinsic or feedback mechanisms which limit it. So, you don't have to worry about it. And lifeguards will tend to get readings closer to 100. And there's a lot of cofactors to go with them. One of the cofactors, there's two primarily. One is K2, the other is magnesium. So I take sufficient magnesium, and if you don't have those cofactors, sometimes you can expose the sun and it won't work. So that's a good thing to take. Most people are deficient in magnesium. That's probably 1 and 2 is vitamin D and magnesium, I would think. And the other one, actually it's somewhat related to my previous thing, is a food that most people don't. There's two primary foods that people don't get enough of. There's starting to emerge some data now that suggests that taking supplements like glycine, which I'm sure you've heard of, is really useful. And it's useful for a darn good reason because it's one of the 3 primary amino acids in collagen. And it's the smallest amino acid. And collagen is in connective tissue like skin, hair, nails, tendons, ligaments. That's what it's made of. Even bones. There's a big significant component of collagen in bones. It's an extracellular matrix that supports your tissues. It keeps you standing and moving, and it gives your body structure essentially. And if you don't get enough, you cannot build healthy collagen if you just have meat. It won't work. There's not enough of those rate limiting amino acids. There's 3. Glycine is 1, proline, and then hydroxyproline, which has a lot to do with what the research I'm working on. It's hydroxyproline. Forms a very magical function in the body that I will reveal later this year. But those are the 3 magic amino acids. And they are a repeating structure within collagen, and it actually forms a triple helix. And very special sauce, what happens with a triple helix. And I've kind of identified what that is. But essentially, if you're not eating connective tissue, and most of us don't, and most of us have stopped eating Jell-O as a dessert in the 50s and 60s. You can still buy Jell-O, but now it's a perversion. It's not what it used to be, but which is just gelatin. And gelatin and collagen are almost identical. Gelatin's a little more processed. Collagen's typically a bit healthier. And you can make collagen. The ideal way to get collagen is by making it. And that most people make it. I started with, I'm sure you've heard of Natasha Campbell McBride. That's it. Natasha Campbell McBride. She's a neurologist, had an autistic child, and popularized a diet called the GAPS diet. And a big portion of the GAPS diet was bone broth. And I tried to make it back then. It was in the early 2000s. And it's such a pain. You got to cook the bones for 72 hours. Who's got time to cook bones for 72 hours?
Yeah.
Well, I learned, and I figured out, others have figured it out too, but there's a much simpler, more efficient, and quicker way to do it. You have any guess on how to do it? You might. You're pretty smart.
A faster way to make bone broth?
Yes.
Well, you could do a pressure cooker.
That's it. I knew you did. Yeah, pressure cooker.
Yeah.
4 hours. If you have organic grass-fed bones, and the best are beef is the best. I would be careful of chicken bones because the fattened chickens, unless you're raising chickens based on a protocol developed by Ashley Armstrong and is being spread across the country, and I'm helping her with that, and actually having a brand of eggs called Golden Nuggets because they are 1/4 to 1/5, maybe even 1/6 less linoleic acid than a normal egg. In other words, you can eat 6 of her eggs and you have as much linoleic acid as in one of a commercial egg. That much lower reduction. And It doesn't matter if LA is from a healthy food like eggs, it's still dangerous. And when the quantities exceed a certain threshold, which is typically about 2 grams a day, certainly more than 5 grams a day. And almost everyone now is getting 10, 15, 20 grams a day. So once you get over 4 or 5 grams, you reach a threshold where you're increasing your risk for almost every disease, especially cancer. I think that's cancer and estrogen and linoleic acid and endotoxin are the three primary causes of cancer because they all destroy metabolic function and they cause this. When your mitochondria don't work, you have to resort to a primitive form to create energy, anaerobic fermentation. So that's creation of cellular energy, not in the mitochondria, but in the cytosol, or the cytoplasm, in a primitive pathway called glycolysis. And that's not efficient at all and generates lactic acid and causes lots of problems. And that's what happens when you're metabolically inflexible. You go towards that pathway, and that's a cancer pathway. Bad news.
Hey, Dr. Axe here. Do you have limiting beliefs that are holding you back from a serious breakthrough in your life? If so, you're not alone. As a doctor, I've witnessed countless patients who, no matter how many new diets or lifestyle hacks they tried, would continue to get stuck in the same rut, unable to achieve long-lasting transformation until they changed their mindsets. As soon as they began to think this, not that, their results were incredible. A mindset controlled by limiting beliefs will keep you stuck, locked in a prison of unpursued dreams and unreached goals. While life may be bearable on this level, it's also stale and unfulfilling. The good news is it doesn't have to stay this way. In Think This, Not That, I uncover 12 mental barriers that obstruct personal growth and hinder success and give you the tools to break through these barriers to help you live your best life possible. Each chapter explores one of these barriers with helpful visuals and practical exercises you can use to peel back the layers of the false narratives that have held you captive and finally experience a transformative mind shift. You can order a copy at joshaxe.com, and if you order before April 2nd, you'll get an exclusive to my 3-part Mindset Masterclass, also a 12-week workbook, also numerous other bonuses that are worth hundreds of dollars to help you think this, not that, and experience that breakthrough you've been waiting for. Yeah, so, it's so interesting what you're saying. You know, there is a company that I work with. They do blood work, and they had told me, and they test, you know, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and they said when they were looking at the deficiencies, the most common ones, the top 3 micronutrients were vitamin D, magnesium, and I want to say the third was zinc. Those were their.
It could be, yeah, for sure.
Those were the. So you're spot on with what you're sharing, and then again, collagen we know, and you know what's so interesting?
Well, there's one more I want to mention. Yeah. It's in eggs, but healthy eggs only. And we're going to make a form of this that doesn't exist because there is no healthy supplement for this nutrient. So do not take this supplement as a nutrient. You have to take it as food, and the only food that's high in is eggs. Egg yolk, not the whites. I do not recommend eating egg whites. I do not eat egg whites. I only eat egg yolks. The whites are loaded with tryptophan, which is a precursor of serotonin. Serotonin is not your friend in high levels. You do not want excess serotonin. So the nutrient I was referring to is choline. Almost everyone's deficient in choline and collagen. And unless you're eating egg yolks, you're not going to get it. I mean, you need like 400 or 500 milligrams a day. And egg yolk, even one egg yolk is 125. But that's the highest form of source of choline. I mean, you can get it in the liver, but the amount of liver you'd get toxic in some of the fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A. So the best source is egg yolks. And that's why I think almost everyone would benefit from healthy eggs. But If you got the LA, it's like you're putting a rock in a hard place, but you can't. I personally raise my own chickens. I have 25 chickens.
Wow.
And I have a guard dog to protect against a predator. So, but because I've had like over 50, 60 chickens killed by predators. That is a problem. Because they're so hard. They have no defenses. They're just like dessert.
Yeah.
And it's good dessert by predators because they're very low LA. I don't give them hardly any L. It's very similar to Ashley's eggs because I use her formula to feed them. So that's good. So we were talking about nutrients, and I forgot where I left off. It was zinc you mentioned, and
and you were talking about choline and the incredible benefits there.
Yeah, choline is a precursor for acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter for the parasympathetic nervous system. Most of us it doesn't function well. So, yeah, and it has a wide variety of other functions. But your health is going to be challenged if you're not. It actually is I think it forms a phospholipid too, which is important for structural function and other metabolic or biochemical characteristics, or not characteristics, but functions that we have. So choline is, you want to be really careful. And there's nutrient trackers like Chronometer that you can use to input that are free, and you just input your food and it'll tell you how much you're getting. So you don't have to guess. You can look at these foods, and you can look at your protein constituents too. So, although Chronometer doesn't do well for measuring, they only put the essential aminos, and glycine is not considered an essential amino acid, but it should be. It's kind of a misnomer, really, because it's by their definition what they consider. Yes, it's essential if your body can make it, but if you can't make it in sufficient quantities for you're required for health, then it becomes essential, which what happens with glycine. Even though your body makes glycine, it can't make enough because your requirement is so high that you have to get it in your diet. Otherwise, you're not going to be healthy. You cannot make enough glycine to be healthy. It's impossible.
One of the things that myself and Jordan Rubin, we've talked about this a few times when we started really getting into bone broth and using it and looking at how much of our body's made up of these collagen proteins. It's like one third.
1/3, yeah. 1/3 of the proteins are collagen. That is a mind-bending fact, and congratulations to you for knowing that, because most people don't.
But here's my question for you. I want to get your thoughts on this. Is that, I remember when Dr. Sears came out with this, and you were sharing this around the same time. You were the first two people I heard say this in terms of these omega ratios, right? We need more omega-3s, or the omega-6s are way too high. That's causing inflammation. Yes. Do you think there's a similar phenomenon, a similar aspect to balancing out your collagen proteins and more of these?
No question, absolutely.
Proteins?
Yes, and that's well documented. You can just look up the literature. The excess of certain amino acids in meat, like methionine, histidine, serotonin, or tryptophan.
And then I read another study that said
decreases in longevity. But if you balance it out with collagen, then it's okay.
Yeah, because I read another study. So it was like methionine could decrease your lifespan, but glycine could increase your lifespan. It's the
glycine to methionine ratio, right? But there's also histidine and there's tryptophan. So these are things that you do not want. You need some. Yes, you absolutely need some. But when you go excess and you eat just an all-meat diet, like carnivore, not a good idea unless you're eating the connective tissue. Some people do. They eat the bone broth. And that's the easiest way to get it. It's the bone broth. And make it in a this is a pearl for you because you probably don't know this. But if you have a pet, you should. You can go to butcher, preferably a butcher from a grass-fed organic cow, and get what's called the knuckle bone. Have you ever heard of the knuckle bone? Probably haven't. Mm-mm. It's not a knuckle. It's actually a butcher term for the hip bone or the knee bone. It's a joint. And they're about the size. You can hold it with two hands. It's not huge. It probably weighs, 2 to 4 pounds, depending on the size of the animal. And you could take one of those bones and put it in a pressure cooker, fill it up the water up to above the bone, and then turn it on for 4 hours if it's an organic grass-fed cow. If it's not organic, then you only do it for 2 hours because you're going to leach out some crap out of the bones that you don't want. So you can the 4 hours is better, but only if it's a healthy animal. And then you let it cool down. And here's the key that's sometimes forgotten is that once it's cooled down, you put it in the refrigerator overnight or in the freezer if you're going to do it in an hour or two. And then you skim off the fat. You don't want to keep the fat in there. And then you've got bone broth. That's like some of the best bone broth you can get. And you can't buy bone broth that good, fresh and made from healthy bones. I mean, that's the perfect bone broth. And that bone, if you want to have healthy pets, that's another passion of mine, is because pretty much every pet food that's sold is going to decrease your pet's lifespan by almost 50%. 50%. It's worse than human nutrition. And they've bastardized the rules to prevent any other company from competing. And prevent them literally makes it illegal to put good foods in there, like animal fats.
Yeah.
So you have to make your own, and it's pretty easy to do. You can just give them the diet for cats or for dogs is bones, raw bones, not cooked bones, raw bones, and meat.
Yeah.
Bones are full of connective tissue, so they don't have to worry about eating the meat, but they'll eat the fat too, and they get the connective. So they got the perfect balance. That's literally, and then of course the organs, or liver and heart, but not large amounts, maybe an ounce or two a day, depending on the size of the dog, and that is the perfect. They're literally eating nose to tail. They're eating all the connective tissue. They're eating the muscle meat, and they're eating the organs. And that is a prescription for health, and the bones. And if you don't give your dog bones, they will have dental decay, and they probably have to have their teeth pulled because they're rotting, because the bones are what's required to clean the dental plaque from their teeth. And when you give them bones like every day, they will have the cleanest teeth, and they'll never have dental disease.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And that's what they need. And so I know it's not a human tangent, but a lot of people have pets.
I want to ask you one more question about pets. When you think about pets, and you think about obviously the food, feeding them raw, as you talked about, real food, what are some of the other things? If there is one supplement that a dog would need that dogs tend to be deficient in, what are the top one or two that you
think? The top one, the only one I give my dog.
Yeah.
Eggshells. Crushed eggshells, half a teaspoon.
Really?
Why? Calcium.
Well, yeah.
Calcium. And calcium, we're actually going to make a product out of this, but crushed eggshells from healthy chickens actually have collagen and hyaluronic acid.
The membrane inside.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you can dry them and crush them up in a coffee grinder or a bigger mixer if you have more, and you can have the best calcium supplement out there, and you just put it in their food, they'll eat it. And it does always release calcium carbonate primarily, and highly bioabsorbable. And guess what else it is? It's a trace mineral supplement. Go figure.
Yeah.
And guess the only problem is it costs too much.
Yeah.
It's free.
Well, it's free, exactly. Yeah.
So that would be the supplement I give them. And technically it's not a supplement, it's a food. They're eating the eggshells. And I do not feed my pet the whites at all. I just give them the yolks. Because they just like we do, they need the choline. So I probably, my chickens, I had some problems with them. So I'm only giving them 2 a day, but I'm going to give them 6 a day pretty soon. 6 yolks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But he's a big dog. He's going to be 150 pounds. So.
One of the other things that I've admired so much about you for so long, Dr. Mercola, is that you've always been very outspoken. That whether it was the COVID pandemic or the pharmaceutical companies using Roundup years ago or the overprescription of medications, you've always been the first person I can think of to speak out against these people with really no fear. I'm curious to get your thoughts. I want to go to Roundup and some of these the insecticides, the pesticides. What are some things people need to be aware of when it comes to these chemicals? What are some of the side effects, and what are some of the things people can do in terms of just consciously avoiding them?
Okay, that's a good question. But I can acknowledge, thank you for the comment on the fear. I happen to be allergic to fear. I'm allergic to fear, and that's because fear is a thought that resides in your mind. And we run into serious problems if we're in our mind all the time, because that's a thimble of knowledge compared to the ocean of infinite wisdom that's available outside of that. And when you access that, there is no fear there. None. Zero. When you connect to your consciousness, or some people call it spirit or energy, it's just not there. There is no fear. So it's easy to do these things if you're in that space. And I tend to spend a lot of time there. So that's what I enjoy doing. Yeah. So with respect to the Roundup, it's interesting. Glyphosate, it sounds familiar. Glycine. Well, glyphosate is glycine with phosphates on it. That's all it is. So there are some scientists like Stephanie Seneff who speculate that it is a substitution into the amino acid because it's there, it's present, and gets plugged in to the DNA sequence or the RNA that is the instructions to make the proteins, right? The transcription of the proteins. And that could be a problem. And some others suggest that steric hindrance or just the physical characteristics of the size of the molecule may be a problem, but it clearly it's a metabolic poison. It should not be in your body, and fortunately, there's very simple and easy ways to avoid it. One is, it certainly would be make sure you get enough connective tissue would be ideally, or take glycine. If that hypothesis is correct, then you'll have a sufficiency of glycine will prevent it being integrated, that the glyphosate molecule being integrated into your proteins. Secondly, is to just avoid GMOs. I know sometimes that's hard, especially with grains, because many grains like wheat would be the classic example. It's not a GMO grain, but they use it to dry the wheat, and they don't even have to put it on the label. So when they cut it down and harvest it, the easiest way for them to do is spray glyphosate on it.
Wow.
That's, so unless it's organic wheat, it's going to be most likely have glyphosate. So it's pervasive. If you're healthy, you get sun exposure and you do sauna. Sauna would be another way to help detox it out of your body. I do a sauna 3 days a week. I've been doing right before this interview. And I think it's a good practice to get into. If you run, I used to be a runner. And during those days, I didn't need to take a sauna, because really the reason sauna works is it causes sweat. And when you sweat, you excrete the toxins. So if you're sweating regularly, you don't need a sauna, but most of us don't. And since I stopped running, gosh, it's almost a quarter century ago, I need a sauna. And I think most people, unless they're doing cardio or they're sweating all day, they need to do a sauna. Benefit from it.
Yeah, that's great. So one thing that I've noticed that you've done over the years is you've been very advanced in terms of some of the tech and doing some different everything from, you were one of the first people to talk about infrared saunas, and using things like this for our health, hyperbaric chambers. You had talked about many years ago.
I've explored some things that I later find out may not be as good as I thought. Hyperbaric chambers were one of them. They have their utility for sure. They've helped a lot of people, but it's not a great innovation as I initially believed. So there are other simpler ones. One of the best. What do you think the best? I've been exercising since 1968, Josh. That's a long time. That's 56 years. That's a half a century more than half a century. So what do you think I've concluded is the best exercise?
I'm going to guess weight training.
No, you're guessing correctly. It's not. It's a useful exercise, and it's something I do engage in. But interestingly, there was a study published in July of last year out of the University of Minnesota. Yeah,
walking.
Walking. It's walking.
Yeah.
And walking, because it's a moderate exercise. Where resistance training is pretty pernicious, actually. It's actually toxic, and you can see that by people who bodybuild. They tend to die early. A lot of them. These are not people who live in the bicentenarians typically. So does that mean you shouldn't do it? No, you just have to do it wisely, and wisely is like less than 2 hours a week. And there were days I was actually working out 2 hours a day. I got to be pretty buff too. I mean, especially for someone at 70. Yeah. So, it definitely does work. And there's value. You don't want to be sarcopenic when you get older. But on the other hand, you don't want to stress your body that much. And walking doesn't. The study that was published last year showed pretty clearly. I actually interviewed the author of the study. He was a Mayo Clinic fellow, I think. And he found that there was no J curve for walking. In other words, the more you walk, the better benefit you got. It was actually like a 40% decrease in mortality with just walking.
Wow.
Just walking. But you got to do it. And the beautiful thing about walking, it doesn't have to be all at once. In fact, it's probably better if you break it up. The more you break it up, the better. So you can do a 2-hour walk, and you can do, just say an hour walk, or you can do 4 15-minute walks. The 4 15 minutes would be better, 100% better, because your body likes to break it up during the day. You don't want to be static, all day. So walking would be the best for sure. Resistance training is good. Flexibility training. I'm actually developing a few things, developing something called 22nd century medicine. And a subdivision is that 22nd century yoga, which is a mobility movement. Actually, mobility medicine is what I'm calling it. And I released some of my first chapters on the site next week. You would know that you're a chiropractor. What percentage of the population adult population has cervical problems, neck issues? Take a guess.
I mean, at what age? Just the
No,
general
adults,
population?
adults, not kids.
70%?
Close. You're pretty sharp, Josh. No, 80%.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
lot. That's a lot. That is a lot. I know you don't see patients now, but when you were, you saw a lot of neck problems.
Yes.
So there are simple things you can do, sunlight being one of them, and exercises, but mobility movements, because typically yoga doesn't address the neck. They don't. I mean, maybe there's some derivatives of yoga that do, but they typically don't address the neck. And that's 80% of the problem. You know, cervical degenerative disease is real and pervasive. So, I've developed, it's actually an article I'm publishing, I think it's next week. Yeah, I think it is next week. Yeah, and I integrate things like active isolated stretching and something I innovated, I call the Circle 8, or it's an infinity symbol, and moving your neck in an infinity symbol, doing that in conjunction with near-infrared light on your cervical spine. So, this is 22nd century yoga I created.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, because the goal, so what are the metrics of health, right? How do you know you're reversing biological age? It's an interesting question, because I can assure you that DNA methylation is not the answer. It's confusion, and it gives you false information. But it's pretty simple. What are the biological functions of humans? And you age parameter that. So would you consider yourself less biologically old if you had the mobility of a child?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't you? I mean, that's pretty, or if you could see as well as a child, or if you could hear, or if you could taste, or you can smell as well. So it's your biology that gives you the clues, and you can measure these things. So those are the metrics that need to be done to determine biological age. And then mitochondrial function too would be another even more fundamental one. So the metrics that longevity medicine has are bullshit. Essentially, they're almost meaningless. Yeah. And another metric is grip strength. Do you ever measure your grip strength?
No, you know what though? I'd read that. The only way I've done that is through. I read a study on this a couple years ago, and so one of the things I started doing was just hanging from a pull-up bar. So I get up to about 2 minutes.
You nailed this. That's definitely part of mobility medicine for sure. How long are you hanging for?
I'm up to like 2 minutes.
Wow! Congratulations. That's an A+.
Yeah, the only reason so let me tell you, I had a great dad growing up. My dad, he was an old military guy. He was a great guy, but
He's still alive?
Yeah, he's in his 70s. They live in Florida.
Great.
They're great
Excellent.
people. But before I walked in from the garage, he put in a pull-up bar and he said, I want you to do pull-ups every day before you walk in the door. So, I mean, I was able to at one point do almost 30 pull-ups. So I actually had a little bit of an advantage. Yeah. Now this was when I was
that
18 years old.
That was impressive. Nevertheless,
I can't
anything
do that
over
anymore.
20 is like world class almost. It's really hard to get over 20 because it's you lose the energy to do it. Obviously you need muscles to do it, but you just don't have enough. You can't create enough energy to do it. That's fantastic. Now, how many people? There's very few people who have ever done 30 pull-ups at once. Very few.
Yeah. Well, that's the one thing I can, probably the one physical sort of area I could have bragged about. But that's all thanks to my dad for sure.
Well, thank you. Yeah, your dad. Our parents are, it's very rare to have two parents that love you. But if you do, as you very well, your dad obviously did.
Both,
and if your mom did too, then you're set. There's only 1% out of 50 who has that privilege. Only one. I happen to have it too. So both of my parents love me tremendously through the roof. And that allows you to function in the culture to do things that are extraordinary. Now, you can get that benefit by yourself, but it's really hard. It's really hard. And it's actually a big portion of what I'm doing with the book that I've written is helping people understand it and implement strategies to connect back to their consciousness and spirit. So, because it's a big thing, and one of the ways is to be biologically healthy, for sure. Improve mitochondrial cellular energy production, because the energy we produce in our mitochondria is almost identical to the energy we came from. It's a mind-bending concept, but it's true. And the energy that we ultimately return to is really simple. It's almost identical. So, and we create that in our bodies when we're alive. And then when we pass, we return to energy. So, but it's interesting. It's a similar type of energy, almost identical.
Wow.
So
fascinating.
and one of the ways, so by engaging in that production, not only do you improve your biological health, but you improve your spiritual health and your ability to connect to your consciousness, and you have access to resources and wisdom that is not available in your mind, just isn't, because your mind is usually polluted with brainwashing propaganda. Typically,
Yeah.
in our culture,
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. One of the last things
Oh,
I'll
wait,
just say, and then
no,
a
no.
question I had.
Let me
Go
just
ahead.
mention this because I want to mention it
Yeah.
before you go. Is that I would go to Amazon and look up a dynamometer. They cost about $25, and you can measure your grip strength. I'll bet you're
Yeah.
close to 60 kilograms, which is about maybe 130 pounds. If you can tank for 2 minutes, you're about 130 pounds. I can mine. I'm about 125, 128 pounds, or 50. I think it was almost 60. I was like 58.8 kilograms. But they're $25. It's all, because you think, oh, this is like $400 instrument, and I don't know how to interpret it. But it's a digital instrument. You turn it on and you go, you just press it, and then you'll know your grip strength. But grip strength, it is clearly associated with, it's probably one of the most powerful ones associated with longevity. Very accurate, and because you cannot do this, you have to have strong muscles, but you have to be able to create cellular energy to do that. So congratulations, 2 minutes is phenomenal. Most people, they will have trouble getting to 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was reading, especially over 60,
Yeah.
the number is extremely low. It really starts to.
Yeah, I can get to 2 minutes pretty regularly, but
That's awesome.
It's not easy. It's not easy. It's definitely a feat. There's not many 7-year-olds that can do that.
Oh, yeah.
There's some, but I've actually done 3 minutes if I cheat, and by cheating, you can put liquid, sticky stuff on it, and your chances you're just like glued to they're glued to the bar.
That's funny. That's so good. Well, I'm incredibly impressed. One of the last things I want to just share is that you've done such an amazing job in something you had referenced earlier, and that is, and I want to give a quote of this, and you've heard this before, but John D. Rockefeller said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I think that more and more people, I do feel like going through this COVID pandemic, there were a lot of people that were asleep, and most haven't woken up, but a lot more have. Mm-hmm. I think a lot more people are aware now because they just tried to force things on us in such a strong way. And I think that most people don't think, like I think Carl Jung, the famed psychologist, said, most people don't think. It's hard. That's why most people don't do it. But one of the things that you've really inspired so many people to do is be able to think. And you were one of the first people I remember who said, well, you asked that, a way to get to the truth is to ask why again and again and again and again to where you get to the root. And so you've done such a phenomenal job of just being able to do that with people. And so one of the last questions I have for you is, how do you recommend people that listen to this? How do you recommend that they learn to think? How do you recommend they learn to start to get to the root of the issues like you have done? Because again, you've really been able to do this, to get to the root of the problems really earlier than so many people.
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's not a simple answer, but it just goes back to the basics. And the ones I mentioned earlier in our conversation is that you have to have cellular energy production. If you don't have energy, your brain is not functioning. You can't think. You really need power and energy, and you get it from food, avoiding linoleic acid, which is a mitochondrial poison. Keep your intake below 2 grams a day. There's an important video I created, and actually I could announce here, but on this Sunday, all our articles come back from behind the paywall on Substack. So that is available for anyone.
Wonderful.
So we decided to do that and bring them back. But you can look at that video for the details, because the devil's in the details. So get low linoleic acid and connect to, that helps to connect to your consciousness, because if you're in your mind and you're listening to brainwashing propaganda and you're watching TV, the news, which is one of the worst things you can do, that will perpetuate fear. If you're on social media, so you want to disengage from that completely and identify sources that are telling the truth, at least as far as you can perceive, because sometimes it's really difficult. But at least the information you're consuming is not obvious propaganda, because almost anything from the conventional media, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, that's all just government propaganda. Nothing pure propaganda. And it may be true, but probably is more likely than not true. it's definitely pushing an agenda. So if you get that data input minimized and you are healthy, then you'll be able to connect better to your consciousness and really activate that, because you could have the best brain out there, but if you are metabolically damaged and you don't have the energy to think, that's the first step. You have to have fuel in the tank. You have to have fuel in the tank. And then what are the other things? Walking every day.
Yes.
Sleeping well. This is not rocket science at all. There are some really powerful interventions that you can do that are thanks to technology, but you got to have the basics first. Walking, sun exposure, no linoleic acid, no processed foods, essentially, which, replicating ancestral practices. And when you do that, stay away from the brainwashing propaganda and connect to valid sources of truth and wisdom, you're golden, and you'll self-correct, and you'll think, because you'll be inputting data that's closer to truth than listening to the lies, essentially.
So good. Well, Dr. Mercola, I want to say thanks so much for coming on and share your wisdom. Thank you so much. I mean, there are so many people that I think most people recognize this for anyone that's followed you, but you've inspired so many people in the space to start to take control of their health, to start to...
You know how many that is? We had it measured. It's hundreds of millions.
Wow.
Hundreds of millions. But you know what? That seems like a lot, and it is. But we're not finished, because the goal is 4 billion.
Wow.
And I'm pretty confident we're going to reach it in the next 5 years. We've got a strategy. So you're going to see a lot of what I'm doing in the next few months. The book's all about it, and we've got really big plans. So I'm so excited, because this is what you heard in this conversation is exactly what people need to hear. And what I'm seeking to implement is strategy so that they can integrate that into their lifestyle easily and facilitate it with simple strategies. So, because the body's the magic. You were taught that at chiropractic. It's innate intelligence, right? All you have to do is activate it. That's all it requires. It's not like rocket science. You just give the body what it needs. It will take care of it. It does not want to go to disease. It wants to go to health.
Yeah.
That's what you're designed to do. If given what you need, you're going to be healthy. It's your advantage. You just have to stay away from stuff that's going to make you unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening today. I want to thank, again, Dr. Mercola here for sharing all his wisdom today, and be on the lookout for his new book. It'll be coming out here before too long. So you can go to Amazon or just search for it on his website. It's mercola.com. But check out his new book. Check out his articles. He's such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And want to say again, thanks so much for just being a pioneer and a trailblazer in in just natural health. You've inspired so many people, Dr. Mercola.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to have a delightful conversation. Appreciate it.
Of course. And again, thanks everybody for listening and supporting this show, the Ancient Health podcast here. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. And hey, if you enjoyed this, make sure to share it with a friend. Some of the wisdom Dr. Mercola shared today, I truly believe is life-changing. Everybody, again, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode.